Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this September 8th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. if you choose to, and that's that's Pacific time on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Today I want to concentrate on the visit of Pope Francis coming to the United States here in the next weeks to come in September, and all of the talk regarding that. Now, there's two things I'd like to mention. I think you have to understand the history of the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church a bit before you can make up your mind on whether this visit is good or bad. And secondly, I think you have to look at a document called Agenda 21. It's a UN document that we're going to talk about. And that document is important because the Pope basically is partnering up with the UN, with our government, and I believe it is for a centralized government control and a totalitarian mandates that resemble basically communism. And this agenda is quite important to look at. I'm going to go over the 17 points 17 or 18 major points which show you exactly what they're trying to do. Now, I said the importance of the Pope's visit is to basically their idea is to control your mind, body, and soul, and the New World Order cannot do this without the help and the direction of the Vatican, and that's what this is all about. Now, I understood that through a couple of stories that I've done. One, the Tony Alamo ministry, how the words first of John Paul II, then of Pope Francis ring true, and let me explain. Pope John Paul II once said that most every church now is falling under the auspices or the umbrella of the ecumenical movement and is basically under the control of the Catholic Church. He didn't put it that way, but he said there still are some pesky ministries out there that need to be stamped out. And he mentioned it in kind of glowing terms, as they always do, but his main goal was to remove ministries like Tony Alamo and people who were discussing the Vatican openly. And Pope Francis said that. Pope John Paul II said that. Now, Pope Francis is on record of stating that Christianity cannot exist without being involved and under the Catholic Church. So that tells you something, folks. Now, I told you a long time ago that if you look at Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, it is a pagan religion. It has no resemblance to Christianity, only in their pomp and in their double talk. When you listen to their messages, they just claim to be Christians, but they don't practice it. Just as if this country claims to be free and democratic and is actually headed towards a fascist regime. It's exactly what they do. They hide behind Christianity, Jesus, the U.S. Constitution, when in fact they are all working together under Agenda 21 to bring this blueprint for a globalist government controlled by corporate interest, and the Pope is behind this. Now, they want to control your mind, body, and soul. He's going to come here talking about sustainability. So let's look at this first. Now, what is Agenda 21? It is basically this. It is the in the year 2030 agenda decoded. I'm going to do that for you. It's a blueprint for the global enslavement of humanity under the boot of corporate and Vatican masters. And that's why the Pope is going to talk much. He's not going to come here speaking about the Gospels. He's going to talk about all of these points I'm going to mention. And so is the UN, so is your government officials. And in a sense, America will be kind of wiped off the map, slowly but surely. Now, yesterday was the Slave Labor Day holiday, and I say that basically not for those rich, you-know-whats in Washington, or the 1% of rich people, or those lucky enough to be baseball players or Hollywood stars who are milking the system by not telling the truth at all about anything they do. And basically not these rich doctors who are making money off of killing you through cancer cures that don't work, and also bilking you for millions of dollars, and not also these rich lawyers who are basically in the pocket of the Vatican and all these corrupt judges. I'm talking about the majority of people in this country who are basically slave laborers. And then you're going to have the big IRS come in and take some of your money as well, to add injury to insult. And now they're flooding America with all these illegal immigrants to have a bigger workforce that are going to be loyal and subservient because it's better than where they came from, because where they came from had already been ravaged by the Vatican and all these dictators and all of these people that, are working basically for the New World Order. So America's left. And this, if you translate this 2030 agenda, this blueprint for a globalist government, here's what the Pope and what our leaders are going to be telling you. We have to end poverty in all forms everywhere in the world. Now, what does it really mean? It means put everybody on government welfare, food stamps, housing subsidies, and handouts that make them obedient slaves to a global government. Put them on a dole, they're not going to cause any problems. Never allow people upward mobility to help themselves. Instead, teach mass victimization and obedience to a government and to a Vatican that provides, a monthly allowance for basic essentials like food and medicine. Probably medicine that'll kill you. What else is he going to say? The Pope will say, we need to end hunger, achieve food security, improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. That means the entire planet is going to be invaded by Monsanto's patented seeds, GMOs, while increasing the use of deadly herbicides under the false claim of increased output of food crops. They're going to genetically engineer modified plants to boost specific vitamin chemicals while having no idea of long-term consequences of this genetic pollution or cross-species genetic experiments carried out openly in a fragile ecosystem. That's basically what that means. Now, he's also going to say we're going to ensure healthy lives and promote the well-being for all ages. And what that means is they're going to mandate 100-plus new vaccines for all children and adults at gunpoint, threatening parents with arrest and imprisonment like they did with the Alamo ministry. Do you know that when they put these 36 Christian kids, when they put them in the custody of the DHS, they could not find abuse charges? But you know what they said? The parents were abusing their children by not vaccinating them because these people believe that vaccinations caused illness, could cause death. And so did Dr. Bradstreet and a few other of these doctors, alternative doctors, who over the last few months have been found suicided or strangely killed. I think they were murdered because of their research showing the false pretenses behind cancer radiation treatments, how basically cancer can be cured in a different manner. At least there's evidence showing that if we do what they were doing, we could have a better success rate with autism and many other diseases that they're inflicting upon us. However, this research needs to be quashed because if this gets out, they're going to lose all their cancer research money. And then they're not going to make as money cutting you open and keeping you sick. Yeah. I had a friend, my lifelong friend, whose sister passed away not long ago, and she was 59 years old, and she came down with breast cancer. What my friend told me was that once they put her on chemotherapy, within 2 months she was dead. He felt it was from the chemotherapy. Now, I believe if Dr. Bradstreet could have, and we should have known, they've known this stuff a long time ago, the people in the AMA who are basically behind Agenda 21 as well as working with the Vatican. And that's why the Pope is partnering up with all these people. If she would have been allowed to use this natural cure, which I talk about, it's called GCMAF. It's a natural protein missing in our immune systems now because of all these vaccines and because of all the pollution and all the degraded food that we eat. Yes. Now, let's go on to another one. They're going to come and say, we're going to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. What does that mean? They're going to push this false history and a dumbed-down education under Common Core, education standards that produce nothing but obedient workers. They don't want free-thinking individuals who figure this stuff out. They don't want independent thinkers. Never let people learn the real history, or else they might realize they don't want to repeat it. Now, they want to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. And they're going to use this. Now, what does that mean? It's going to criminalize Christianity, just like they targeted the Alamo ministry. It's going to marginalize heterosexuality, demonize males, and promote this liberation crazy homosexual agenda everywhere legally. The real goal is never equality, but rather the marginalization and the shaming of everyone who expresses any male characteristics whatsoever. The ultimate goal is to feminize society, creating widespread acceptance of gentle obedience, along with the self-weakening ideas of communal property and sharing everything. Because only male energy has the strength to rise up against oppression, right? Fight for the rights. The suppression of male energy is key to keeping this population in a state of eternal obedience. Now they're going to also say ensure availability and sustainability of management of water and sanitation. They're going to this means they're going to allow powerful corporations to control water supplies and charge ungodly prices to build new water delivery infrastructure that ensures availability. Now, they're going to ensure, they're going to say, affordable, reliable, sustainable energy. All this means is they're going to penalize coal, gas, and oil while pushing doomed-to-fail green energy subsidies to brain-dead startup headed by friends of the White House and all these other rich you-know-whats who all go bankrupt in 5 or 6 years. Now, there's a bunch of other things I want to talk about, but this is just a taste. That's about 8 of the 18 goals of this Agenda 21 that I wanted to bring forth. But what I did want to tell you is we're going to do this for the rest of the show, and tomorrow I'll come back and probably won't finish this part of the show either. But years ago, I think it's important that you understand we have the Pope coming in the 23rd of September here to speak to Congress. Unprecedented. I mean, it's basically a showing that we are basically a Catholic pagan country, not a Christian, free, democratic country. Now, years ago, I interviewed Richard Bennett. He was a Roman Catholic priest who found out the truth and began to teach people a real history of the Vatican. Now, he was a priest for 22 years. And I want to call upon him again because he gives you a nice history of the papacy. And I think you ought to think about this before you start applauding the Pope's visit. And also remember, they never change. The Vatican's the same today as it was during the Inquisition. Now let's listen to Richard Bennett in the history of the papacy.
It was 48 years that I lived as a Catholic, and 22 of those years was as a devout Roman Catholic priest. And during all that time I knew very little about the history of the Catholic Church. I had little bits here and there, but I had no overview of church history when it relates to the Pope, the papacy, and the papal church. And it is essential that one understand the history And that's what I want to deal with. I want to deal with the overview of the history of this papal church. And it is a dramatic contrast between the papal church as it now is, an enormous worldwide structure of over 1 billion people, at least on record. Many of those don't practice, but at least on paper. And a structure that is not just purportedly spiritual, but is political and has its representatives in 174 nations, its papal ambassadors. So it's a huge structure that is politically and religiously received by the world. Now, when we compare that to the beginnings of the believing church in Rome, where we had some group of believers meeting in people's homes with individual pastors leading the brotherhood of believers, when we compare that to what now is purportedly the Church of Rome, you couldn't get a more dynamic contrast, because the early believers and the pastors that taught them trusted in the written word of God, as it was in the Gospels that they had in the procession and the writings of the apostles and the Old Testament. They depended on the written word of God, and they saw the gospel as the power of God unto salvation. And that was the very theme of Paul's letter to the Romans, where he commended them for their faith, that their faith was known throughout the whole world. Paul begins his letter to the Romans in chapter 1, verse 8. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit and in the gospel of his Son. That was the gospel that the early believers held to, that the gospel truly was the power of God unto salvation for them, as they withstood years of horrendous suffering for their faith and stood strong in that gospel for which the Apostle Paul commended them. So it would have been horrendous to them and unbelievable that a bishop of Rome or an elder of Rome could be called the most holy Roman pontiff. It would have been just unthinkable for those early believers, or that any group of believers calling itself Christian could say that grace comes through rituals or sacraments, or that Mary, the wonderful believer, could be called the most holy one. Things like that would be just unthinkable. And they who held to a brotherhood of believers because of what Christ Jesus said, one is your Lord and Master, and ye are all brethren. One of the brethren was the pastor. But they were all brothers and sisters in the Lord. How ununderstandable would it be to these people to have a hierarchy where the priest is accountable to the bishop, and the bishops are accountable to cardinals, and the cardinals are accountable to the Pope. And that's only part of the hierarchical structure, a summary of the main ingredients. How unthinkable. One is your Lord and Master, and ye are all brethren. That's the way the early believers lived their faith and trusted in the Lord and withstood persecution. There was some horrendous persecution. The most famous, you probably remember, was under Nero in the year 64, where so many of the believers suffered. I went to the Forum in Rome, And I saw there the place where so many of the believers were burnt as torchlights for the games, and so the spectacle also in the Colosseum. I went there to Rome, and as a priest I walked in the floors of the Colosseum wondering, is the faith that I stand in the same faith that these people died for? I had my doubts even as a priest as I walked around the Colosseum, and it was utterly different, the faith of the men and women who suffered under Nero. And so the beginnings of the faith in Rome and what has become the Church of Rome are totally different things. The spread of the faith in Rome was intensive, and it grew immensely, so that there were many believers right across the city in different groups of believers meeting in homes. And it was under Diocletian, the emperor, that there was some of the most severe and horrific tortures, just to read of them and the sufferings that the believers underwent. But far from exterminating the gospel, and far from putting the true gospel underfoot, the persecutions purified the believers and their pastors, and they stood strong. And it is remarkable, the faith of the early church, the believers in the city of Rome. It's just unbelievably strong and remarkable. And what happened? What huge change took place? And the huge change was a political change, whereby the Emperor Constantine purportedly got into Christianity. He was going to be baptized 24 years later after his so-called conversion, because he wanted to continue to sin, and so that baptism would wipe away his sins after 24 years. And it was then that Eusebius baptized him. But he purportedly was converted, even though he wasn't baptized, but he was converted. And he, together with the emperor in the east, Licinius, whom he hadn't conquered as yet, the two of them together recognized paganism and Christianity. Both were recognized, but Christianity for the first time. And so we had the recognition of the Christians as a true church that could be legally okay in the empire. Now, if it had stopped there, maybe there would have been temptations to compromise, but it didn't stop there. Constantine took over the reins of government in spiritual matters just as he had. He started dictating how things should be. And just as there were vice regions or people who looked after different parts of the empire for him, he thought that in the empire there should be main churches set up in each city, and that there should be 4 main cities whereby the Christian world would be controlled from these 4 major cities. And they were...
Okay, we're going to break there and come back and listen to more of the history by Richard Bennett of the Papacy. But I think you can understand what's happening. This political meshing together of Christianity with the Vatican and Constantine beginning to change what true believers are all about. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial, the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour on the Investigative Journal, and you can see what Richard Bennett's going to be getting at here. Paganize Christianity, politicize it, use it together to control the people, and dilute the Gospels, dilute the fact that you can find God on your own through reading the Bible, through other means, without having to pay indulgences or confessions to an organization that is hiding behind Jesus and Christianity, just as your government officials are hiding behind freedom and Christianity as well. Quite a way to control things, and that's exactly what's going on today, and why you're seeing this union, this joining together of the Vatican beast and our government right before your very eyes. And the real interesting thing is, most people are applauding it. Back to Richard Bennett.
Antioch and Alexandria, Jerusalem and Rome. These were the 4 places that were chosen. And in each of these cities, there was a church with a particular elder chosen to be the head church. And that elder was to rule over other elders in that area. So this idea, the beginning of a hierarchy, was a political dictate that the church was now to be run in the same way as the empire was run. And it is sad that, for the most part, the believers gave in to the dictates. They were no longer under persecution. They were free, and they were giving in to the desires of the emperor, and they were following along. Of course, the church in Rome was not St. Peter's or anything like it, because the whole idea of Peter being in Rome, which is a tradition, is a later on tradition, and there was no idea of claiming to be in the shoes of St. Peter. That comes about particularly with Innocent I in 401. But a church in Rome is chosen as being the main church, and similarly in Jerusalem, and similarly in Antioch and Alexandria. And then there is a vying between these 4 patriarchs as to who is the greatest. The very thing that Christ Jesus warned against. There is now a desiring that the recognition be given to these dioceses, as they're called, and the head of the diocese, a patriarch or a chief, who's overseeing the other elders. He is the chief bishop. So this is the way the things are being set up, and it is really sad to see what had been believers now falling under this system. And what is heartbreaking is to see that the so-called Bishop of Rome is now looking for glory for himself. That far from being a Bible believer and pointing to Christ, he is looking for honor for himself. That they're arguing that if Rome is the queen of cities, and people look to her as the richest, the most wealthy, and the ruling power of Rome. Why should not her bishop be king of bishops? So we have the beginning of the bishops of Rome looking to be superior, not only to the other three patriarchs, but to other places in the world. So it is really sad to see that. Now, I must say that we must make a note of the fact that while this was happening and the Christian world was coming under this umbrella, as it were, of a political system being set up by the Roman emperor, we had true believers at the same time who in no way were touched by any of this. We had the amazing Vaudois, a whole story in themselves, coming up from northern Italy into southern France, and of course later on spreading through different parts of Europe as they evangelized. We had the amazing story of the Vaudois later on becoming the Waldenses. We have such as the Anabaptists and many other groups, the Albigenses. We know a lot about them from their lifestyle, their agriculture, and the tremendous lives they lived, even though Rome has tried to darken their name, but still the true faith of the Albigenses in France comes out. So we have many other groups at this period and right through history who did not come under this political system. But we're talking about the way Christendom was being shaped independent of these true believers. It was at the end of the 4th century, we saw it was at the beginning of the 4th century, in 313, that the Edict of Milan took place. That towards the end of the 4th century, when you begin to study what was being taught in Rome and in other parts of the empire, that we see that the gospel, the power of God unto salvation, is for the most part gone. We do have exceptions, and we do have noteworthy exceptions, like Augustine being preaching grace in a remarkable way, which is not exactly as we would want it, but still emphatic. But for the most part, and even with Augustine, there is also a sacramentalism by which it is presupposed that a person becomes a Christian when water is poured on them or they're immersed under water by a ritual called baptism, that this is the way a person actually becomes Christian. So the ceremonies had overtaken the true gospel, and that is really sad, because that is towards the end of the 4th century, coming into the 5th century. And then established quite clearly now is the laity-clergy split, that the clergy are at a different level, that they are to be looked up to. They're the ones who dictate, they're the ones who tell you what you are to believe. And it is no longer that the Word of God is to dictate the truths of faith. The clergy become a dictating power. And at the end of the 5th century, we have also the idea of the elder being a priest, the sacrificial priesthood, by which it is purported that we have a priesthood that can offer sacrifice. The beginnings of that, it took many centuries to develop into what it now is. There's no mention of a sacrificial priesthood in the New Testament, besides the one high priesthood of Christ Jesus and his finished sacrifice. But a continuing sacrificial priesthood is nowhere in the pages of the New Testament. But this started, the embryo of this started at the end of the 5th century. By the year 440, we had Leo the First, sometimes called Leo the Great, and he was really purporting that he was the greatest of the bishops, and that it was to him that people should look as sovereign. So we have here now the the turning point where the Bishop of Rome is absolutely claiming to be a spiritual sovereign over other bishops. It's no way accepted universally, but the claim is being made and made strongly. To help this claim was a political decision of, again, Constantine. In the year 330, another key date in history, 330, he decides to move his political power out of the city of Rome and go to Constantinople, the city called after him. And it's there that he's going to rule his empire, and not from Rome. And this leaves the Bishop of Rome far freer to establish a political base for himself and people to look to him in civil matters and not only spiritual matters. And what enhanced this was the fact that the barbarians were now attacking the Roman Empire. They were coming in from the north, hordes of barbarians who were pagans, and they were physically taking over the empire. But as they were physically taking control of the empire, they were being won over by the religion that was now taught in Rome. Not Christianity, but the religion of Rome. And here we have another famous turning point. It was in the year 496 that Clovis, who was the king of the Franks, he is converted to the religion of Rome. And he gets himself baptized to become a Christian. And the Bishop of Rome at the time recognized him as the eldest son of the church, a title that France still has in the eyes of the Church of Rome. And so this was the beginning of a nation becoming converted, because the king is converted, and of course then the people are baptized and they are accepted into this religion of the Church of Rome. Now, if it stopped there, it would have been bad enough, but it didn't stop there. We had a similar conversion of the Burgundians of southern Gaul, of the Visigoths of Spain, of the Suevi of Portugal, and of the Anglo-Saxons of Britain. They all joined in becoming Christians by being baptized. So we have this huge influx of peoples into the Church of Rome who have gone through a ritual and who know nothing of biblical conversion. And so we have now an immense structure that is building up way outside the city of Rome and other parts of the world, and France being the first in particular to become a leading Roman Catholic power. But this amazing thing then of a Church of Rome being set up outside the city of Rome, but it wasn't recognized at all universally by elders and bishops, and it wasn't accepted while physically there was a lot of evidence that we have now beginnings of a universal church. It wasn't until the middle of the 8th century that serious contention was made, so that the minds of pastors, who are now called bishops, would be converted to this idea of a supreme bishop in Rome. And it was through a fraudulent document called the Donation of Constantine. This document purportedly was an official document that was sent from the Emperor Constantine to the Bishop of Rome, Sylvester, who was Bishop of Rome in 335. And so in this document, Constantine bequeaths to the Bishop of Rome, Sylvester, 335, his imperial power, his palace, and many of the glories that went with the empire, and its territorial possessions. So this is the document that was to change Christendom and to convert many people to accepting Roman Catholicism. I'd like to read from the actual document to give you some sort of a flavor for what was purportedly the words of the Emperor Constantine to the Bishop of Rome. He said, or he was purported to have said, "We attribute to the See of Peter all the dignity, all the glory, all the authority of the imperial power. Furthermore, we give to Sylvester and to his successors our palace of the Lateran, which is incontestably the finest palace on the earth. We give to him our crown, our mitre, our diadem, and all our imperial vestments. We transfer to him the imperial dignity. We bestow on the Holy Pontiff in free gift the city of Rome and all the western cities of Italy. To cede precedence to him, we divest ourselves of our authority over all these provinces, and we withdraw from Rome, transferring the seat of our empire to Byzantium, inasmuch as it is not proper that an earthly emperor should preserve the least authority where God hath established the head of his religion." End of this quotation from this fraudulent document. And this document was upheld as a genuine document for 600 years from that date. It was held to be there in 335, where it was an actual fact written. Historians now see most probably around 754. The Latin which it was written was not the Latin of that time, it was the Latin of the 8th century. And the title of Prince of the Apostles, Vicar of Christ, were totally unknown at the time of Sylvester. So the concepts are concepts of the 8th century, and they're purportedly put in the writing of Constantine to the Bishop of Rome. So it was that fraudulent document that really established legally the claims of Rome. And it was on that document that they put into their law, and that they demanded submission because of the document, and people were burnt at the stake and were horribly tortured who did not accept this document. This was the document that really established the Roman Catholic Church. The actual physical possession of territory was to follow. It was in the 8th century that the Arian kings of Lombardy were attacking different cities in Italy, and even purportedly coming to attack Rome itself. And Rome was in danger to the Arians and the Lombards. And the Pope of Rome, Sylvester the Second, and we could call him Pope at the time because now he's exercising the authority that later on became the hallmark of the popes. He calls on Pepin the Short, who was mayor of the palace in France, and he calls on him for help. This is what Pepin needed, because Pepin was about to usurp the kingdom. He usurped the kingdom from the king and became king himself. And then to establish his kingdom, he came across into Italy and he defeated the Lombards. And then he gave to the Pope of Rome territory and physical charge of cities, so that the papacy begins now to have physical power as an earthly monarch, and civil rule, by which they are civil rulers besides so-called spiritual rulers. Now this donation by Pepin became even more considerable under the more famous son. You must have heard this name, Charlemagne, Charles the Great, Charlemagne, the famous son of Pepin, who was to succeed to become master of most of the Romano-Germanic world. He conquered the nations, and he was the one now who was really the key political figure in Europe. He was called upon by the Bishop of Rome to help, and he came and placed even more cities under the authority of the Bishop of Rome. And then the whole thing was crowned as he was crowned. Christmas Eve in the famous year 800, the emperor of the so-called Holy Roman Empire kneels at the feet of Leo, the Bishop of Rome, and he is crowned as the emperor, and he accepts the fact that the Pope is the one who gives crowns and gives authority. And so the whole power structure and the recognition now by Charlemagne of the Roman Church and the giving of a bigger inheritance of actual physical cities and civil authority to Rome has really established the Church of Rome. And the fraudulent document, the donation of Constantine, is truly bearing fruit, because more and more are now giving in and admitting that there is a power in Rome and there is a universal church. And so we have the real bowing down now to the Bishop of Rome.
And I might add that bowing down to the Bishop of Rome is taking place in full public view in the next couple of weeks right here in America.
The tide that follows is horrendous, because it is years, centuries, nearly 2 centuries of debauchery and immorality. But it begins with Nicholas the First in 865. He drew from the donation of Constantine the audacity to claim authority over kings and bishops throughout the empire, and it was recognized to a great extent, and the bishops of Rome became recognized as spiritual leaders and temporal leaders, and that princes and kings should bow to him as had Charlemagne. And so we have 2 centuries of popes coming and going, some in their teens, and we have centuries of debased immorality on what was supposed to be now claimed to be the seat of Peter. We have 2 centuries that are horrendous in immorality, and some of the most immoral men in history were the men who sat on the papal throne during those 200 years. And we had the 2 infamous women of history, Theodora and Marozia. These women controlled the papacy, and they were the ones who decided between lovers and illegitimate sons who should sit on the throne of Rome. And some of that, her reading of the immorality of those 2 centuries is unbelievable when we read of what was purportedly the papacy and ruling spiritually the seat of debauchery, and the way it was fought over the papacy by leading families in Italy to have control of the papacy. A huge turning took place in 1073 under a very famous man, Pope Gregory VII.
Okay, and we're going to end there and come back tomorrow with Pope Gregory VII and continue this, as well as continue looking at the UN Agenda 21 this blueprint for bringing the whole world under the Pope of Rome, under a new world order, one world government, one world religion, and that's basically what it's going to boil down to. And you can say you heard it here, when it really does. It's happening right as we speak. I mean, you can look at the things going on in this country, in the world, and we'll be back tomorrow to continue on the Investigative Journal.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased. It has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.